The first case we're exploring today occurred in Boltim, North Sulawesi. Driven solely by an obsession with a luxurious lifestyle, the perpetrator was willing to commit a horrific crime that shocked Indonesia. Tilda Azara Mokowagau, commonly called Zara, was an 8-year-old girl who lived with her parents in Tutuyan 3 Village, Boltim District, North Sulawesi. Zara's family life was quite good. As an only child, she received abundant care and love from her parents. Her father worked as a civil servant in the Boltim district, while her mother was a homemaker, focusing on caring for and educating Zara. At the time, Zara was in 2nd grade of elementary school. At school, Zara was an intelligent and outstanding student, always achieving high rankings and good grades. After school hours, following lunch, Zara usually went to study the Quran not far from home. Additionally, Zara often played at her grandmother's house and relatives' homes nearby, including the house of her aunt Arnita Mamonto, commonly called Anning. At that time, Anning lived with her husband and young child, about 65 feet from Zara's house. Therefore, Zara frequently visited Anning's house to play with her child. Zara was very close to her aunt, even calling Anning mother because they were so close. Anning's life was financially strained, with her husband working at a water refilling station while she was a stay-at-home mother. Despite difficult circumstances, Anning was obsessed with a luxurious lifestyle she couldn't afford. This obsession had previously caused trouble with neighbors when she was caught stealing clothes from clotheslines, simply because of her desire to wear beautiful clothes she couldn't buy. This situation worsened in December 2023. At that time, Anning's covetous eyes couldn't look away from the gold jewelry that Zara regularly wore, necklaces, bracelets, and rings, all precious gifts that Zara's parents had given to their beloved daughter. Those glittering pieces of jewelry were like a flame, burning through the greed and jealousy smoldering within Anning, leading her to a decision that would change her life forever. Desperate for a new phone, Anning developed a dark plan to steal these pieces of jewelry. She had the advantage that Zara often came to play with her young child. During lunch, when her husband was at work, and the house had only Anning and her baby, she could act without anyone noticing. Anning's husband usually only returned home in the evening, so the time when Zara came to play was the perfect opportunity to execute her plan. However, Anning still needed to find a way to take the jewelry without Zara noticing. Despite having opportunities to be near Zara, Anning couldn't find the ideal moment to commit the theft without being discovered. The fear of being caught haunted her. Anning understood that if the jewelry disappeared exactly when Zara was playing at her house, the girl's parents would certainly suspect her first. Days passed, and Anning continuously observed and waited for a favorable opportunity to take Zara's gold necklace and ring, but these efforts were in vain. Then on January 15th, 2024, after weeks of coveting and desiring, Anning could no longer control her craving when she saw the glittering jewelry on Zara. She decided to move to a bolder and more cruel plan. This time, not just stopping at simple theft, Anning planned to kill Zara to steal her possessions. In her mind, this way was much safer. No need to worry about being discovered, no fear that Zara would tell her parents, and no evidence that could reveal her crime. With firm determination, Anning didn't hesitate to prepare the murder weapon, a large kitchen knife. She even carefully sharpened the blade to ensure the action would proceed smoothly. However, Anning didn't rush to act immediately, but continued to refine every small detail in the plan, finding ways to execute it safely and without leaving traces. Inside, she was filled with confidence that everything would unfold as expected. To create a perfect cover, one evening when her husband had just returned from work, Anning cleverly fabricated a story that she had asked her father for money and would soon receive funds to buy a new phone. This was a deliberate setup. After the plan was completed and she had a large sum of money in hand, her husband wouldn't ask any questions. Unexpectedly, her husband shared that he also wanted to buy a new speaker but didn't have enough money. Hearing this, Anning became even more excited about her cruel plan. Now she could also help her husband fulfill his wish, while he remained completely unaware of the true intentions behind his wife's sweet words. The next day, as soon as her husband left for work, Anning began to focus on her dark plan. She actively followed and searched for Zara everywhere. However, throughout the day, she didn't see the girl anywhere, causing the plan to be postponed until the next day. Then the opportunity came on Thursday, January 18th, around 11 a.m. Aning discovered Zara and her mother at the grandmother's house, not far from Aning's home. Not missing the opportunity, Aning immediately went there, silently observing the situation. A favorable moment appeared when Zara was left alone, playing inside her grandmother's house. Aning approached and sweetly invited the girl to come with her. Zara, with her affection for her aunt, didn't have any suspicion. The girl happily accepted and went along immediately. With an innocent smile, Zara held Aning's hand, not knowing that she was walking into a deadly trap as her aunt led her to her home. When they arrived, Aning told Zara to wait at home, while Aning, who was then ready to act, took her young child to be left with another aunt who also lived in the area. After that, Aning returned home immediately and took the prepared knife, then invited Zara to go to the garden to pick vegetables. Zara, without suspicion, agreed immediately. The two sneaked out of the house through the back way, avoiding the curious eyes of neighbors. Aning led Zara deep into the villagers' coconut plantation area, increasingly far from the residential area. After walking quite a distance, the girl began to get tired and complained of foot pain. Seeing this, Aning carried Zara, her fake concern hiding her intention to find a perfect location for her crime. Finally, Aning found a completely secluded place, beside a dry water ditch in the coconut garden. Not a soul. No one could hear or see them. She gently placed Zara on the ground. In an instant, Aning's gentle face disappeared, replaced by unimaginable cruelty. She suddenly pushed Zara hard, causing the girl to fall face down on the ground. Before Zara could understand what was happening, Aning had already sat on top of her, rendering her completely helpless. Zara, in extreme panic, tried to scream for help, but Aning quickly covered her mouth. With a decisive and cruel motion, she pulled out the knife and slowly cut the girl's neck until it was completely severed. With blood-stained hands, Aning hurriedly stripped the gold jewelry, necklace, bracelet, and ring from Zara's body. Her greedy eyes focused only on the glittering items, completely indifferent to the body of an innocent child. Without hesitation, she threw Zara's dismembered body into the dry water ditch, like discarding a worthless object. After obtaining what she wanted, Aning discarded the murder weapon nearby and left, abandoning Zara's body alone in the desolation. She hurriedly returned home, moving stealthily and cautiously to avoid meeting anyone on the way, especially when her clothes were now soaked with blood. Upon reaching home without delay, Aning immediately bathed, carefully washing away all blood stains from her body and put her blood-stained clothes in the washing machine. In an astonishing act of hypocrisy, Aning performed the Zuhr prayer, as if wanting to cleanse her soul after the disgusting crime. She even prayed that her actions would not be discovered. After completing her ritual, Aning went to pick up her child from her aunt's house, continuing to maintain a normal appearance as if nothing had happened. Not wasting time, she quickly hired a motorized bikak, a type of rickshaw, and went to a gold shop in Tutuyan 2 village not far from home to sell the jewelry she had just stolen. At the gold shop, Aning sold the blood-stained jewelry without a certificate for 3 million rupiah and 70,000 rupiah, approximately $190. With the money from her crime, she didn't hesitate to immediately buy a 0.5-gram piece of gold worth 478,000 rupiah, approximately $30. What she had long craved finally became reality when she bought an Infinix smartphone for 1.1 million rupiah, approximately $70. She continued her shopping spree with blood money at the local supermarket, buying diapers, milk for her child, bottled drinks, and chocolate, everyday items, as if nothing unusual had just happened. After satisfying her shopping craving, Aning returned home with 1.7 million rupiah, approximately $108, left in her pocket. At home, she skillfully maintained a normal appearance, controlling every gesture and expression, creating the calmest mask so that no one could suspect her. Meanwhile, still in the afternoon of that day, Zara's mother began to worry and search for the girl everywhere, because by then Zara should have gone to study the Quran at 2 p.m., but hadn't returned home by evening, which was unusual as Zara had never come home that late. Zara's parents began searching for their daughter at the homes of relatives in the area. They learned that Zara had been seen playing at her grandmother's house at lunchtime, but then the girl seemed to have disappeared without a trace. The fear spread, and soon not only the family, but also the villagers joined in the search, scouring every corner of the village in hopes of finding the girl. Calls for Zara's name echoed everywhere, but only silence answered, a silence that grew heavier with each passing moment. In the house, just a few hundred feet from the crime scene, Aning sat in the shadow of her crime. The calls for Zara's name from the searchers reached her ears, arousing fear in her heart. However, in front of her husband, Aning tried to remain calm, controlling every expression to avoid suspicion. When night fell and there was still no information about Zara, the family's concern turned to more decisive action. They began sharing Zara's pictures on social media platforms, along with an urgent plea for help. Within just a few hours, information about the mysterious disappearance of the girl had spread across Facebook, with hundreds of shares from well-intentioned strangers, all hoping to bring Zara home safely to her family. In desperation and not knowing what else to do, Zara's father, who happened to be close friends with the district head, the Bupati, directly contacted this official. News about the disappearance of an innocent child quickly reached the ears of the most powerful person in the area, marking a turning point in the search and beginning to reveal the first clues leading to the dark truth. Without hesitation upon hearing the bad news, the Bupati immediately visited Zara's family that night. In the tense atmosphere, the Bupati asked, "Who was the last person to see Zara?" From the crowd, a voice rang out. A villager confirmed having seen Zara going with her aunt Aning around midday. This information immediately caught Bupati's attention. Bupati scanned the room, looking for Aning in the crowd but didn't see her. This absence suddenly became notable because everyone knew she was very close to Zara, but wasn't participating in the search for the child. Although no one had raised suspicions about this, it left a vague question in the Bupati's mind. Not wanting to rush to conclusions, the Bupati simply asked a villager to go to Aning's house to invite her to come talk, with the reason of wanting to ask directly about what she knew about Zara's activities that day. After waiting for 20 minutes, Aning finally arrived, and there, Aning fabricated a story, giving a lengthy false testimony, essentially stating that Zara had indeed come to her house at lunchtime, but then Zara was picked up by friends to play, and that was the last time she saw Zara. At first glance, when Aning explained everything to the Bupati, nothing seemed unusual. Everything appeared normal. But it turned out that the Bupati had observed all of her gestures more deeply, and there, the Bupati had felt something abnormal from Aning. First, the Bupati had smelled a fishy odor from Aning's body, to the extent that he had moved his seat away from Aning because he couldn't stand this smell. Second, the Bupati also felt that Aning was tense while explaining. When talking, Aning sometimes curled the edge of her skirt and sometimes squeezed her fingers, which seemed to indicate the panic and anxiety she was feeling. Aning's body language revealed many things to the Bupati. She sat tensely, not daring to lean back on the sofa, a sign of someone in a highly alert state. Stiff shoulders, hands occasionally clenching, eyes darting as if looking for an escape, all reflected feelings of guilt and fear. The strangest thing was Aning's overreaction in a situation that only required simple information. No one was accusing or threatening her, so why did she behave as if being interrogated? Why did every question make her uneasy? Despite the clear suspicious signs, the Bupati remained silent about his suspicions. He understood that one shouldn't accuse someone without evidence, and identifying the perpetrator was the responsibility of the police. However, Aning's strange behavior had been noted in his mind, the first clues of a crime gradually being revealed. By the next morning, when Zara still hadn't appeared, the family had to officially report the girl's disappearance to the police. The police force quickly got involved, cooperating with villagers and the family, conducting searches throughout Tutuyan village. Notably, Aning, the true culprit, also participated in the search team, like a perfect act to cover up her crime. Around 8 p.m., the search came to an end with a horrifying discovery. Zara's body was found in a dry water ditch in the coconut garden area. Shocked cries rang out everywhere when people saw the heartbreaking scene. Zara's body with her head separated from her body. "Cloth! Cloth! Get cloth! The girl is dead! How pitiful!" The painful cries of those who discovered the body echoed in the dark night. Afterward, Zara's body was immediately taken to the Tutuyan Health Center. That night, the Tutuyan Health Center was full of people gathered around, and this discovery had burst open the tears of Zara's parents, who couldn't believe what had happened to their little daughter, especially being found in such a condition. Meanwhile, Aning was also present there, even witnessing Zara's mother crying miserably. So, Aning also covered her face with a headscarf to pretend to cry, and seemingly also panic at what had happened to Zara, so that no one would suspect her. But truly, she began to panic and worry because everyone started wondering who the perpetrator was, who had cruelly done all that to a small child like Zara. On the other hand, that very night, the police also began investigating the body, and Zara's body was also examined forensically to know exactly what had happened to Zara. After examination, it turned out that all of Zara's jewelry at that time, such as necklace, bracelet, and gold ring, were gone. Therefore, initially, the police suspected that Zara might have been a victim of a robbery. Immediately, the police conducted checks on all gold shops in the area to investigate if anyone had sold jewelry such as a necklace, bracelet, and gold ring without a certificate. Since there were only a few gold shops in the area, it didn't take long before the police found clues from the testimony of a gold shop named Logam Jaya in Tutuyan 2 village. According to the testimony of the gold shop owner the day before, indeed a blonde woman carrying an infant had sold jewelry without a certificate. After some jewelry items were brought out, they turned out to be indeed Zara's jewelry. And fortunately, at that gold shop there was also CCTV surveillance, so the police immediately checked the CCTV footage, and indeed it clearly showed Aning as the person who had sold these pieces of jewelry. Unfortunately, the CCTV footage was not made public, but basically there the police had strong evidence that the perpetrator was Aning, the aunt whom Zara loved. Early the next morning, the police went to Aning's house and arrested her. Initially, her husband was also detained to check if he was involved in this case. In reality, at the police station, after everything was explained by the police, Aning's husband was truly shocked after learning that his own wife was the perpetrator of this case, because in fact, her husband really didn't know anything about anything. Even her husband was also grief-stricken about what had happened to Zara. When the truth was revealed, the entire community was plunged into a state of deep shock. No one, from Aning's husband to the villagers, and especially Zara's parents, could believe that the culprit was actually Aning, the woman to whom they had entrusted their complete trust. This betrayal became even more bitter when they recalled the close relationship between Zara and her. What horrified people the most was the blatant deception. Aning had not only actively participated in the search for Zara, but had also shed tears, expressing sorrow when the girl's body was discovered. This was the perfect act of someone who had lost their humanity, making the community's outrage and pain even deeper when they realized how cruelly they had been deceived. Meanwhile, when interrogated, Aning truly had no choice other than to confess everything, as the evidence from the surveillance camera was more than enough to silence her lies throughout this time. She admitted that she had cruelly done all this to Zara because she wanted to steal the girl's jewelry to fulfill her desire to buy a new phone. This confession truly made everyone feel even more furious with this devil, because just for a new phone, she had cruelly murdered a child. We hope that the judge will give an appropriate sentence for her crime, because clearly all her actions were planned and carried out deliberately. Since the case is still in the trial process, let's wait and see what punishment she will face. Next, we'll explore a case that occurred in Jakarta, Indonesia. The main subject of this case is Babe Bakuni, born into an economically disadvantaged farming family that lacked many necessities. Additionally, his parents' strict disciplinary methods made his childhood unhappy, quite different from other children his age. At school, Bakuni was constantly bullied by his peers. His education was challenging, and he frequently had to repeat grades. By age 12, Instead of attending middle school like others his age, Baikuni was still struggling in third grade of elementary school. His family situation only made things worse. His parents continuously criticized him, considering him a stupid child and a family embarrassment for repeatedly failing to advance to the next grade. Beyond verbal abuse, Baikuni regularly endured physical beatings from his own parents. Life under pressure from all sides eventually pushed Baikuni to a desperate decision. In 1972, the 12-year-old boy ran away to Jakarta without a penny in his pocket and no acquaintances. Upon arriving in the capital, harsh reality struck Baikuni: how to survive in an unfamiliar city with nothing and no one to turn to. With no other options, Baikuni became homeless, wandering and making a living by street singing in the Lapangan Banteng area in central Jakarta. But life's pressures didn't stop there. After many years in Jakarta, as a teenager, Baikuni was frequently bullied by street thugs, making him constantly fearful. The older thugs made him unable to refuse anything they demanded, including satisfying their sexual desires. All the thugs were male, as was Baikuni. This continued for several years, affecting his adult development and distorting his sexual orientation, making him lose interest in women. Amid the suffering of life in Jakarta, a man named Saputra felt sorry for Baikuni being continuously bullied by thugs. Eventually, Saputra took pity and invited Baikuni to his village in Kuningan to work caring for his buffalo herd. Baikuni happily accepted and moved to Kuningan, living with Saputra's family. Baikuni became a hard-working child, taking care of Saputra's buffalo herd. There, his life improved and was secure. Additionally, Saputra's family was good, accepting Baikuni and even treating him like their son. After several years living and growing up in Kuningan at age 21, Baikuni married a woman named Era. But in this marriage, Baikuni realized that his sexual orientation was not directed toward women. He even explained this to his wife and told her about his painful past that had traumatized him. Fortunately, his wife accepted everything with an open heart and even empathized with what Baikuni had experienced. After 10 years of marriage and still childless, Baikuni's wife died from illness, causing him immense pain as he truly felt the excruciating loss for the first time. To the extent that Baikuni tried to overcome his grief by returning to Jakarta in 1992. There, Baikuni was no longer homeless as he had savings from his time working in Kuningan. In Jakarta this time, he became a street vendor at the Pulau Gadung bus terminal in East Jakarta and rented a house in the Pulau Gadung area. With his painful past as mentioned, having been a street child in Jakarta, Baikuni initially often felt empathy for the street children he saw. He even brought street children to his rented house, not just one, but many. There, Baikuni cared for and fed the street children he brought home, even treating them like his own children. Many street children came to his rented house, taking turns, and without discrimination, Baikuni treated all those children like his own. Perhaps up to this point, we might still think Baikuni could be a kind man to those street children there, someone who was even considered to be working to support the street children he brought home. But that was only at the beginning. After several years of living with dozens of street children taking turns staying in his rented house, this was when he began to develop evil desires when looking at the boys. The first victim in Baikuni's chain of crimes was Adit, a boy only 12 years old. Like many other children, Adit was an orphan living on the streets of Jakarta and frequently visited and played at Baikuni's house. One fateful day, Baikuni looked at Adit with lustful eyes and invited the boy to the Rawat Rata cemetery in the Pulau Gadung area. Without suspicion, Adit agreed to go along, innocently thinking it was just a normal outing. Upon reaching the deserted cemetery, Baikuni began to reveal his true intentions. Faced with depraved propositions, Adit panicked and firmly refused. Rage erupted, and Baikuni strangled the boy with a fishing line, causing Adit to die on the spot. After committing the cruel act, Baikuni frantically looked around to ensure no one had witnessed his crime. While confused about how to dispose of the body, Baikuni's depraved instincts resurfaced when he saw Adit's motionless body. He performed inhuman acts on the boy's body to satisfy his lust and sick curiosity. This sparked a subsequent chain of crimes from this monster in human form. Afterward, he abandoned Adit's body, leaving it at the cemetery. After a few days, locals finally found Adit's body. But because Adit had no identification documents, no one knew his origins, and there was no one searching for him, this discovery ultimately ended with just the removal of the body, and the case gradually faded into oblivion, making Bakuni truly safe because no one knew he was the perpetrator. Because of this, Bakuni began to become addicted to selecting the next victims from his home. Next, in 1994, Ferry, just 11 years old, was also killed and abused by him in the Pulau Gedung industrial area. Afterward, he also abandoned Ferry's body, leading to the same outcome as Adit's body before. As he was a homeless child, with no family searching and no one knowing his origins, the discovery of the body also only resulted in its removal, and once again Bakuni escaped punishment. Then a month later, still in 1994, Bakuni did the same to one of the children in his house named Dolly, also just 11 years old, who was killed and abused in an abandoned garage in the Kakung area. Afterward, the body was also left behind like that, and at this point still no one knew that this monster was the perpetrator of the chain of crimes. A year later, in 1995, once again, a homeless child named Kiki, also just 11 years old, became the next victim at a secluded place in the Pupar Kakung area, East Jakarta. Afterward, Kiki's body also met the same fate as the previous victims, and Bakuni once again easily escaped all of this. No one even suspected, including the other homeless children in his house and his neighbors. At this point, Bakuni was still called the father of street children, although by then the police had begun investigating the discovery of several children's bodies in the previous year. This did not frighten Bakuni at all because he felt this was easy, as he had always been successful in his actions. Finally, Bakuni became even bolder in doing it without having to go far from home. The next victim was a child named Irwan, 12 years old, who was killed and abused in Bakuni's rented house when the house was empty. Afterward, he cut Irwan's body into several parts to be stored in some plastic bags. Then, he kept those plastic bags in his house for several days. Meanwhile, Bakuni remained calm and unconcerned, carrying on with his normal activities, while other children still regularly came and went from his rented house without knowing what Bakuni was storing in his rental. A few days later, he returned to his hometown in Magelang to avoid police investigation, as by then the police in his area had begun patrolling regularly. Fearing discovery, he went home, taking with him plastic bags containing parts of Irwan's body. Somehow, those plastic bags didn't emit a foul odor. Bakuni succeeded without raising suspicion from anyone as he traveled by bus carrying those plastic bags. Midway to Magelang, Bakuni stopped in Purworejo, Central Java, to dispose of the plastic bags containing Irwan's body in an abandoned plantation there. Afterward, he continued onto another bus to connect to Magelang. In Magelang, he worried that the police in Jakarta were gradually discovering his case, which is why he returned home, even changing his name to Sunarto while in Magelang so no one could detect his presence. After a year in Magelang, it turned out no one was looking for him for this case. Finally, in 1998, Bakuni returned to Jakarta. However, he had begun to feel stressed remembering what he had done to the children he had raised. Because actually, Bakuni had feelings of empathy for street children as he himself had once been a street child in Jakarta, but he also couldn't control his desires. Even his desires dominated his soul, not empathy. Being in a mental crisis, Bakuni decided to go to Kuningan for temporary refuge, intending to rest and hide at the home of his late wife's family. He convinced himself that this temporary refuge would help him regain balance. However, the demon within Bakuni was not easily suppressed. Right at the Kampung Melayu bus terminal in East Jakarta, while waiting for transportation to Kuningan, Bakuni encountered Aris, a lonely street boy just 11 years old. Dark lust immediately arose. With predatory instinct, Bakuni quickly devised a plan and approached the boy. He lured Aris to accompany him to Kuningan, promising a good job and a brighter future. Faced with the promising invitation, Aris, with innocence and burning hope for a better life, didn't hesitate to get on the bus with Bakuni to Kuningan, unaware that he was approaching a tragic fate. Upon arriving at the Kuningan bus terminal, Bekuni immediately invited Aris for a walk to the Ciabac River, West Java. At the river, with the situation being very deserted, Bekuni skillfully lured Aris into the water to bathe and swim, then mercilessly submerged the boy under the water. After Aris died, Bekuni performed inhumane acts on the victim's body to satisfy his depraved instincts, then abandoned the boy's body to drift with the current. A few days later, local residents discovered Aris's body washed up on the riverbank. No one knew the identity of the unfortunate child, a homeless child from Jakarta, without relatives, without identification documents. The incident was simply concluded as an unfortunate drowning. No one suspected a horrific crime behind this death. Once again, Bekuni escaped legal punishment, continuing to be a potential danger to other innocent children. Still feeling safe, still in that year, 1998, Bekuni remained in the home of his late wife's family in Kuningan. This time, he targeted a neighbor's child there named Tegu, just 12 years old. With a plan he had arranged in his mind, Bekuni invited Tegu for a motorcycle ride to the Ciabac River. Being a child, very excited about being invited for a motorcycle ride, Tegu finally agreed to go along. Afterward, Tegu's body also met the same fate as Aris's body before at the same place and executed in the same way. After satisfying himself, he placed Tegu's body in a sack he had prepared, then released it to float down the river. Afterward, Bekuni calmly returned to his wife's family's home as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, that evening, Tegu's family began shouting and frantically searching for Tegu, who had not returned home by evening. Finally, a few days later, residents there found the body of a child in a sack floating on the river, which turned out to be Tegu's body, truly causing his family to panic. Initially, this case was also investigated, but because fingerprints on the body had disappeared, and because the body was found in a condition difficult to recognize as it was found in water, it was very difficult to find traces of the perpetrator there. Here, Bekuni escaped once again, still with no one suspecting. But to ensure his own safety from discovery of what he had done, Bekuni decided to return to Jakarta again. Arriving in Jakarta, he tried to control his desires to not do it anymore, because at this point, Bekuni truly began to fear arrest and started imagining prison. After successfully controlling his desires for several years in Jakarta, then in 2004, Bekuni returned to Magelang, his hometown. But in Magelang, Bekuni was once again tempted when he saw a street child there named Ardi, also just 12 years old, who also ended up being killed and abused. Afterward, he discarded the body in a rice field in the Bugalan area of Magelang. Eventually, the body was found by farmers there. But because Ardi was a street child, no one knew him, nor was anyone searching for him. Like the previous victims, his body was also just removed and no one knew who the perpetrator was, allowing Bekuni once again to escape punishment. Fearing discovery in Magelang, Bekuni decided to return to Jakarta, still living in his old rented house in Pulau Gadung, East Jakarta. There, Bekuni lived normally, meeting and caring for street children once again. Then, a few years later, specifically in 2007, Bekuni once again failed to control his crazy desires, causing him once again to kill and abuse 2 children that year, Riki, just 9 years old, and then a few months later, still in 2007, once again Yusuf, a street child just 7 years old, also became his victim, killed in his rented house without anyone knowing. Bekuni's crimes continued in silence, unknown to anyone, unstoppable. The year 2008 marked a particularly brutal phase when he murdered 3 victims in succession. Adi, 12 years old, Rio, 10 years old, and Arif, only 9 years old. These 3 street children, like the previous victims, had no relatives, no one to search for them when they disappeared. Without identification documents, without fingerprints in the system, without anyone to identify them, these factors made police investigation extremely difficult when their bodies were discovered. Consecutive successes in escaping punishment had made Bekuni bold and addicted to committing these cruel acts. He had developed a false sense of security, believing he would never be caught. He even became more reckless in his methods of committing crimes, no longer fearful or cautious as before. However, every chain of crimes has its ending point, and fate awaited him after he performed brutal acts on his final victim. Fate finally halted Bakuni's chain of crimes after the murder of Ardian, a 9-year-old boy who became his final victim. Unlike the previous victims, Ardian, although also a child who frequently sang in the streets and often visited Bakuni's house, still had a family. This, a small detail that Bakuni did not know, was the starting point for his downfall. Although still living with his parents in Jakarta, Ardian was often neglected, forcing the boy to make a living by street singing and frequently associating with other street children. He rarely returned home, but the important difference was someone would notice his absence. On one fateful afternoon at 2:30, Bakuni noticed Ardian was alone in the house, an opportunity he couldn't miss. Taking advantage of the deserted condition, he lured the boy into the room. When Ardian resisted and refused, Bakuni didn't hesitate to strangle the boy until the victim stopped breathing. Afterward, he performed inhuman acts on the boy's body, an action he had repeated with all previous victims. After satisfying his dark lust, Bakuni displayed a frightening coldness. Without panic or signs of remorse, he calmly left the crime scene, went to his street vendor stall not far away, and continued his daily work as if nothing had happened. Ardian's body was left in the house, waiting for him to return to process it. Late that afternoon, around 5 o'clock, Bakuni returned to his rented house. Noticing the house was still deserted, the other children had not yet returned, he took advantage of the time to proceed with disposing of evidence. With frightening clarity, he cut Ardian's body into 2 parts. The head part was carefully wrapped in old cloth and plastic bags. The rest of the body was packaged in plastic bags and hidden in a mineral water cardboard box. In an action defying logic and crossing all ethical boundaries, he placed the packaged body parts under the chair in front of the house, where the children still often played every day. The horror reached its peak when, that evening, many street children whom Bakuni still often cared for, innocently played on that very chair. None of them knew that, right below, just a few centimeters away, was the dismembered body of their friend. In the silent night at 3 a.m. on January 8, 2010, Bakuni carried out the final step in his plan to dispose of evidence. Taking advantage of the darkness and deserted streets, he moved Ardian's body parts to 2 separate locations, a tactic he believed would make investigation difficult. The torso was discarded along the roadside near the BKT Kakung Bridge, while the head was left in the Warung Jengkol Bridge area in Pulau Gadung, a considerable distance apart. However, fate had been decided. Just a few hours later, around 7 a.m., a local resident walking through the area discovered a suspicious plastic bag by the roadside. Given the unusual appearance of the package, this person opened it to check, and was horrified to discover inside was a headless human body part. Shocked by the horrifying discovery, the resident immediately notified the police. Authorities quickly arrived at the scene and began an investigation, not knowing that this was the first clue that would lead to breaking one of the most horrific serial murder cases in Jakarta's history. That afternoon, once again the police received a report from another resident who had discovered a human head, which was Ardian's head. After examination, it turned out the body and head found at different locations truly came from the same body. At that time, this discovery caused a stir there, once again, in the Pulau Gadung area, East Jakarta, where such discoveries were frequent, all victims of Bakuni, but at that time still no one knew who the real perpetrator was, and what this perpetrator's purpose was, which was truly a great mystery to residents there. But clues about this case finally emerged from the testimony of Artie's parents, after DNA proved it was indeed their son. So, Artie's parents confessed to the police that before his disappearance, Artie often played and slept at Bakuni's house. With this clue, the police immediately shifted their investigation to Bakuni. A search warrant was issued, and authorities quickly raided the subject's house. The search further strengthened suspicions when investigators discovered pieces of Artie's clothing still in the house, important evidence that Bakuni had forgotten to dispose of. Bakuni was taken to the police station for interrogation under strict security. Initially, he still tried to deny guilt, But faced with undeniable evidence and professional interrogation techniques, the wall of silence gradually collapsed. After many hours facing the truth, Bekuni finally surrendered, not only admitting to the crime against Ardian, but also revealing his entire horrific chain of crimes over the years. In the interrogation room, Bekuni's confessions stunned everyone present. This serial killer admitted to having murdered not just a few, but 14 street children from 1993 to 2010, with the sole purpose of satisfying his sick desires. These statements lifted the veil of secrecy on a series of unidentified child body discoveries that had caused public uproar for many years. What made people even more shocked was that the perpetrator of these horrific crimes was none other than Bekuni, a person still loved and respected by the community as a father to street children. The contrast between Bekuni's public image and his true nature created a double shock for the entire society. News of this case quickly spread across the country, becoming the focus of attention for all media. All of Indonesia was plunged into horror and outrage at this series of brutal crimes. In 2010, fear enveloped all of Jakarta, especially the East Jakarta area. Parents, panicked by the existence of a child predator within the community, tightened supervision of their children, many even forbidding their children to play far from home. The name Bekuni became a symbol of horror, a cautionary tale that made an entire generation of Jakarta children grow up in the shadow of fear. Faced with a series of savage and disgusting crimes that had shocked all of Indonesia, the final verdict was delivered on December 13, 2010. Bekuni was sentenced to death. According to Indonesia's judicial process, the execution of the death penalty usually takes place about 10 years from the date of sentencing, which means Bekuni should have been executed in 2020. However, as of the current time, despite the highest sentence and the disgust that public opinion holds for his crimes, Bekuni is still alive. For reasons not widely published, possibly related to legal procedures, appeals, or other factors in the judicial system, the death sentence has not yet been carried out. Currently, this serial killer is still being held in Cipinang Prison, one of the most secure detention facilities in Indonesia. And those are the two cases for today. What are your thoughts on these two cases? Please share in the comments section below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.